The open clearing of the grey-wind people lay silent beneath a sky the color of cold iron. In the center of that circle of trampled red sand, a woman knelt with her wrists bound tightly by coarse rope. The knots had bitten into her skin until the blood slid down her forearms and dotted the earth like dark petals. Even on her knees, Nadira towered above most warriors. 7 feet of sinew and sculpted strength, a figure shaped by years of battle and the hard laws of survival. Yet her eyes, deep, dark, full of storms, held a terror she never showed in a fight. It was the fear of someone who had learned pain from those closest to her. 3 veteran fighters stepped forward with heavy clubs, their faces twisted with resentment. One swung first. Thud! The blow landed across her back. Nadira didn't cry out. She only tightened her jaw, her posture unwavering. Her silence enraged them more than any curse. From the far edge of the circle, the grey-wind chieftain approached. His breath fogged in the bitter air, and his stare was as lifeless as dying embers. "You are a curse upon us," he declared for all to hear. "Too large, too strong. No man wishes for a woman shaped like a storm." His words cracked like a whip. One of the elder women tossed a ragged bundle at Nadira, scraps of cloth and a piece of dried meat so old it would break before bending. "Go," she spat. "The tribe cannot feed someone like you." Nadira rose slowly, her immense frame shadowing the very men who had struck her. None of them missed the single tear sliding down her cheek, though she tried to turn her head away. She didn't fight. She didn't plead. She simply looked at those who had once called her kin as though her heart had already slipped beyond reach. Then she walked, bare feet sinking into frost-crusted sand, stepping past the invisible border that marked the end of her belonging. Behind her, the dull beat of a ceremonial drum echoed across the clearing. An unspoken decree. You no longer exist to us. That night, Nadira found shelter in an abandoned stable, its roof barely holding against the northern wind. She curled her enormous body into a corner and held the few coins she had left, thin, cold, almost weightless. The last remnants of a warrior who had been carved out of her own home and cast into a world that looked upon her with suspicion. For 2 days she walked, hunger scraping her insides raw as she trudged north along a narrow road leading toward Pine Creek. Snow clung to her broad shoulders, and every movement tugged at the wounds on her back, reopening them like whispers of the cruelty that drove her out. When the town finally appeared through the pale winter haze, she paused outside a small general store. Her hands shook as she held out her last 3 coins, begged from a farm out of pity. Cornmeal, a strip of meat, anything to last another day. But a harsh gust of wind swept in. Whoosh! The coins tore from her fingers and skittered across the dirt road like fleeing sparks. Nadira stumbled after them, her long limbs awkward in the tight space, her hunger turning her movements clumsy. She knelt, reaching for a coin her trembling fingers could barely grip. And then another hand reached it first. When Nadira lifted her gaze, a tall man stood before her, broad-shouldered, weather-touched, and steady as the horizon. Wind tousled his dark brown hair, and his sharp eyes, quiet, observant, rested on her without fear. He picked up the remaining coins and placed them gently in her palm. "Wind's got a temper today," he said, his voice deep and calm. "Doesn't want to leave anything in your hands." Nadira's suspicion rose like a shield. In towns like this, a woman of her size and heritage usually invited only mockery or hostility. Yet the man didn't step back. His gaze flicked to her bound, scarred wrists, the tear in her shoulder, her threadbare clothing. "You're shaking," he said softly. Not in pity, but as a simple truth spoken aloud. Heat stung Nadira's face. She forced herself upright, trying to fold her immense frame inward, a lifetime habit born from rejection. "I'm fine," she muttered. "I'll go." The man shook his head gently. "I've got a room close by. Clean bed. Lock on the door. You look like you could use a warm place to rest." Nadira stepped back. Her voice was taut with the instinct of a warrior always bracing for betrayal. "Why would you help me? You don't even know who I am." The man, Jonas Hale, met her eyes steadily. "I know enough," he said. "You need shelter, and I've got it." Her breath hitched. For the first time in years, someone offered her something without a price, without fear, without disgust. After a long moment, Nadira gave a small, fragile nod. Jonas gestured toward the road. "Snow's coming. Let's get you inside before it turns cruel." And for the first time since being cast out, Nadira followed someone not because she was forced, but because she was invited. Jonas's cabin sat beyond a stand of cottonwood trees, their branches heavy with snow that fell in soft white sheets. The wooden home was small but sturdy, smelling faintly of pine resin and old firewood. When Nadira stepped inside, her head nearly brushed the beams, yet Jonas showed no surprise, only a faint smile of welcome. "Rest," he said gently. "I'll warm some soup." Nadira nodded, unsure how to behave in a space that was not hostile. The clean mattress felt foreign, too soft and too generous for someone used to cold earth and open skies. When Jonas returned with a steaming bowl, she was still sitting upright like a soldier awaiting judgment. He set the bowl down carefully. "No one will take that from you," he murmured. That simple assurance cracked something inside her. A single tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, almost ashamed of being seen. Jonas only sat down nearby and let her eat in silence. By the next morning, Jonas left for work hauling freight, but when he returned just before dusk, he stopped in the yard and stared upward in disbelief. Nadira was on the roof, balanced on one long leg, while hammering a plank into place with impressive precision. Her muscles shifted beneath her worn shirt and she moved with the effortless control of someone born to handle the world's weight. Jonas set down the crate he carried. "You've done more in a day than I've done all month." Nadira didn't look at him. "I don't want to be idle," she said quietly. "If I don't work, people send me away." Jonas stepped closer, folding his arms. "I don't send people away for staying alive." Nadira paused at that, her expression flickering as if she didn't know what part of herself should hold the words. For the first time since arriving, she climbed down from the roof not out of fear or caution, but because someone had spoken to her with genuine respect. That evening they shared dinner at Jonas's wooden table. Nadira sat carefully on the far edge of the bench, holding her weight as if it were a burden she might break the furniture with. Jonas noticed the tension in her shoulders and said, "That bench survived my brother's wrestling on it. It's stronger than it looks." Nadira exhaled slowly and eased herself down fully. The bruises on her arms had begun to fade, though they remained visible reminders of what she had endured. Jonas gazed at them for a moment, then asked gently, "What happened to you?" Nadira hesitated, the firelight reflecting in her dark eyes. "They thought I brought misfortune. Too big, too strong, a sign of bad things to come." Jonas leaned in, elbows resting on the table. "I see only one misfortune." She looked up warily. "What's that?" His voice softened. "They lost someone remarkable." Nadira turned away quickly, but the slight tremble in her shoulders revealed how deeply the words struck her. 2 days later, while Nadira carried a small list of supplies past the saloon, drunken voices rose from the steps. Men sneered and shouted slurs about her height and Apache blood. Nadira stiffened, instincts urging her to walk away. But before she moved, Jonas appeared at the end of the street, still holding his horse's lead rope. His expression changed the moment he heard the laughter. His voice cut through the noise like an axe striking wood. "Shut your mouths." The men hesitated, then laughed louder. One slurred, "What's wrong, Jonas? Got yourself a giant you're hiding?" Jonas strode toward them, each step deliberate. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten with wild gestures. He simply spoke with cold, deadly clarity. "If any of you speak about her again, you'll answer to me." The air shifted. The laughter died. Nadira watched from behind him, her heart pounding. She had survived battles, raids, winters, hunger, but never had anyone stood between her and cruelty. Until now. That night, rain tapped steadily against the roof as Jonas stoked the fire. Nadira sat far from the warmth, knees pulled to her chest, trying to fold her towering frame into something smaller. Her blanket barely covered her shoulders. Jonas walked over, puzzled. "Why sit all the way over here? It's freezing tonight." Nadira didn't lift her eyes. "I don't want to take up space. I don't want to bother you." Jonas sat beside her, leaving only a breath of space. Nadira immediately shifted, trying to create distance. The movement made Jonas's chest tighten. "Nadira," he asked softly, "why do you keep pulling away from me?" Only the storm outside answered at first. Then quietly she said, "People get tired of me. They leave. It's easier if I keep myself small." Jonas turned to face her. The firelight warmed her sorrow-darkened eyes. He placed his hand gently on hers, a giant hand, scarred and trembling faintly under his touch. "If I wanted distance," he whispered, "I would have kept it. You're here because I want you here." Nadira inhaled sharply, as if those words were something she had never been allowed to hope for. "You live like you're waiting to hear 'get out,'" he said quietly. "But this is my home, and in my home, no one tells you that." Nadira blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall. Her voice shook. "People leave when they're kind. The kinder they are, the sooner they go." Jonas shook his head, brushing his thumb across the back of her hand. "I'm not afraid of you, and I don't abandon people for being themselves." Nadira finally looked him in the eyes, her breath wavering. Jonas leaned in, slowly, letting her decide. When she didn't move away, he closed the distance. Their kiss was gentle but powerful, like distant thunder rolling over the plains. Nadira's hands rested lightly on his shoulders, careful not to grip too hard. Jonas murmured, "You never have to make yourself small with me." Nadira pressed her forehead to his, steadying her breath. "You are a good man," she whispered. Something inside Jonas ignited, tender, fierce, unstoppable. He wrapped his arms around her as the rain battered the cabin, and for the first time in years, Nadira did not feel alone. Whispers spread through Pine Creek faster than wildfire across dry brush. Folks talked about Jonas living with an Apache woman as tall as a barn beam, some with curiosity, others with mockery dripping off their tongues. Whenever Nadira walked through town, eyes clung to her, some full of wonder, many filled with cruel amusement. One morning, Jonas was hauling freight toward the town square, and Nadira rode beside him on the wagon seat. Even wrapped in a loose cloak, she drew every stare like a flame draws moths. Nadira bowed her head, the old instinct to shrink herself returning like a familiar ache. But no amount of folding inward could hide someone built like a mountain. When Jonas stopped at the saloon to deliver a barrel, a group of drunken men spotted her. One staggered forward, raising his mug with a sloppy grin. "Hey, giant girl, how much food does it take to keep you fed? Or does Jonas trade half the barn for you?" Laughter erupted. Nadira's jaw tightened. She had endured far worse insults, but the sting never faded. Jonas froze mid-step. He turned slowly, his eyes sharpening like steel heated in a smith's fire. Without raising his voice, he strode toward the men, his words cutting clean through their laughter. "Keep your mouths shut." The men snickered, emboldened by drink. Another jeered, "What's wrong, Jonas? Afraid we'll scare off your big Apache woman?" Jonas didn't blink. "Say one more word about her," he said, voice low and final, "and I'll make you regret it." The entire street went quiet. Jonas wasn't known for temper, but when it surfaced, it carried the promise of consequences no man wanted to meet. He walked back to Nadira, took her hand, and guided her to stand beside him in the center of the road. His next words rang loud enough for every door and window to hear. "She is not working for me. She is not bound to me." He paused, tightening his hand around hers. "She is my wife." Gasps rippled across the street. Men sobered instantly. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Nadira stared at Jonas, stunned, breath catching in her throat. No one had ever claimed her with pride. No one had ever placed her beside them instead of behind. Jonas turned to her, his expression gentle now that the confrontation had passed. "Come," he said softly. "We're going to the church." Nadira followed him in stunned silence, each step echoing louder than the last. Inside the small chapel, candlelight flickered against polished wood. The minister, startled by the sudden request, nonetheless agreed. In the quiet embrace of warm light, Nadira placed her hand in Jonas's. His hand was small in hers, yet the grip was steady and certain. The minister spoke the vows, but it was Jonas's eyes that anchored her, grounding her in a way she had never known. When he declared Nadira his wife, her breath shuddered. She, once cast out by her own people, now stood beside a man who chose her openly. When Jonas slid a simple band onto her finger, Nadira felt a realization bloom inside her like early spring thawing winter's grip. She wasn't a burden. She wasn't a curse. She was wanted. When they stepped outside, snowflakes drifted down softly, as if the world itself welcomed the union no tribe had ever blessed. For the first time, Nadira felt the stirrings of a future she had believed was forever beyond reach. Winter arrived with brutal force, clawing at the cabin walls with icy fingers. Snow built up beneath the windows, wind howled down the chimney, and every night the temperature dropped low enough to crack old beams. Inside, Jonas fed the stove tirelessly, but his attention stayed fixed on Nadira, who lay in bed gripping the blankets as waves of pain crossed her face. She was in labor, her massive hands clutching Jonas's so tightly his knuckles whitened. Though Nadira's body had survived battles, storms, and exile, she trembled now, not from weakness, but from fear she had buried deep. "Breathe," Jonas whispered, brushing sweat from her brow. She shook her head, panting. "Jonas, if something happens, if I—" He cupped her cheek, forcing her to meet his steady gaze. "No if. You hear me? You're stronger than any lie they ever told you." Another contraction struck, fierce enough to bend even her unyielding resolve. She bit back a scream, tears tracking down her temples. Jonas held her through every wave, murmuring encouragement like a prayer. "You're not alone. I'm here, always." Then, through the roar of winter battering the roof, a new sound pierced the air. A sharp, trembling cry. Nadira gasped, collapsing back against the pillow. Jonas lifted a small bundle swaddled in a warm cloth and placed it gently into her arms. A baby girl, tiny, warm, and fragile against the enormity of her mother's hands. Dark-skinned, long-limbed, with eyes that blinked like new stars opening for the first time. Nadira stared at her daughter, a sob tearing free from somewhere deep within. It was raw, shaking, the sound of a heart that had been denied joy for too long. "Jonas, I didn't think I could. I feared." Jonas knelt beside her, touching his forehead to hers and the baby's. "You did it," he whispered. "You can do anything. You always could." Nadira cradled the newborn close, marveling at the warmth of that small body pressed against her chest. "Her name is Asha," she whispered. "It means new hope." Jonas smiled, placing a kiss on Nadira's trembling hand. "A perfect name for both of you." Outside, the storm still raged. But inside that humble cabin, new life had arrived. A family had formed, one strong enough to face any winter the world could summon. Spring crept into Dakota slowly, like a great beast waking from a long, cold slumber. Snow melted into quiet ribbons of water that trickled down the eaves of Jonas's cabin, and the bitter winds softened into gentle breezes. Inside the small wooden house, the world felt warmer than it ever had. It was filled with new sounds, Asha's soft cries, Jonas's low laughter, and Nadira's quiet humming in the old Apache tongue. The baby grew quickly, her limbs lengthening faster than the midwife expected, her bright black eyes absorbing every glimmer of light. When Nadira held her, it looked as if a giant cradled a tiny flame, but Jonas saw only beauty, strength, and peace wrapped together. One afternoon, he lifted Asha in his arms to give Nadira a moment of rest, swaying the little girl gently while saying, "She's hungry again. You sure she's not competing with you in strength?" Nadira laughed, a deep, resonant laugh like the echo of ancient drums. "If she grows as tall as me, the town might run for the hills," she teased. Jonas slid an arm around her waist. "If there were two of you," he said, "this town would be twice as safe." At first, Pine Creek did not know what to make of Nadira. Some stared with unease, others with curiosity, a few with lingering prejudice. But over the weeks that followed, the town slowly adjusted to the sight of a towering Apache woman carrying crates on one shoulder or standing at the general store with her daughter sleeping against her chest. Children pointed in amazement, elders whispered, travelers stepped aside in awe. One day, the dressmaker's wife watched Nadira for a long moment before finally saying with no malice, "You're strong, but when you hold that baby..." I don't see a warrior. I see a mother." Nadira paused, unsure how to respond. Compliments were not something she had ever been offered freely. Jonas came up behind her, squeezing her hand gently. He felt the shift in her breathing, the quiet, startled joy that came from being seen with kindness, not suspicion. As they walked home through the cottonwoods, Asha slept peacefully in a sling against Nadira's chest. The blossoms drifted down like white feathers, brushing against Nadira's braids. Jonas touched her back softly. "Do you remember telling me you didn't belong anywhere?" Nadira didn't answer. The memory was still sharp, still painful. "You belong where you're loved," Jonas said simply. His voice carried none of the doubts she expected, just steady truth, as certain as sunrise. "You belong here, with me, with Asha." Nadira looked down at her sleeping daughter. For so many years she had only seen herself through the eyes of those who cast her aside, a misfortune, a burden, a being too large and strange to deserve tenderness. But here, surrounded by pine-scented air and cotton blossoms drifting like soft snow, she felt something shift inside her. She saw a home she had never known. She saw the warmth of a man who had chosen her not out of pity, but out of love. She saw her daughter, breathing gently in her arms, a living proof that her life carried meaning. Nadira whispered, her voice trembling not from fear but from a rare, overwhelming joy. "At last, I am where I belong." Jonas pressed a kiss to her temple, closing his eyes as he held her close. For the first time, Nadira allowed herself to believe she deserved this. And so, the days in Pine Creek continued, simple, quiet, filled with warmth instead of the constant threat of exile. Nadira and Jonas rebuilt the stable together, planted a garden behind the cabin, and spent evenings watching Asha reach for fireflies with tiny hands. Nadira still walked with the strength of a warrior, but her shoulders no longer carried the weight of abandonment. Her laughter came more easily. Her steps grew lighter. When townsfolk spoke to her, she looked them in the eye instead of lowering her head. She had found not just a home, but a life she had never dared to imagine, a life where she was welcomed, respected, and deeply loved. And Jonas, steady as always, stood beside her through every sunrise and storm. Asha grew in a world where her mother's strength was not feared but admired, and where her father's calm heart was a guiding light. Dear friends, love does not measure the shape of our bodies or the shadows of our past. It does not choose the mighty over the meek nor the familiar over the strange. Love finds its way into the lives of those who once believed they were unworthy of it. It arrives quietly, in steady hands and gentle words, in a gaze that sees beyond scars and sorrow. Love is a door that opens even after every other one has been shut. For Nadira and Jonas, love became their shelter, soft, true, unwavering. It was the strength that carried them through winter storms and into brighter days. And wherever you are in the world, I hope this story finds you safe, warm, and at peace. If Nadira's journey touched something in your heart, let me know in the comments. And if it moved you, type the number 1. Thank you for sharing this moment with me, dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling.